Assalamualaikum and good morning, respected chairperson and fellow researchers. My name is Danizah Che Din from Polytechnic Seberang Prime, Malaysia. Today, I would like to present our paper entitled Enhancing Accounting Learning Effectiveness Among Diploma Students with Autism Spectrum Disorder, or known as ASD. This is a literature review of visual and cognitive pedagogical approaches. This study focuses on how accounting education can become more inclusive and cognitively accessible for neurodiverse learners, particularly students with ASD. This is a conceptual paper. Let me begin my presentation by explaining the introduction or the background of the study. In recent years, inclusive education has expanded significantly in higher education institutions. More students with autism spectrum disorder or ASD are now entering diploma and university programs, including technical and professional fields. However, many classrooms are still rely on traditional teaching approaches, which are highly lecture-based, verbally dense, abstract, and procedurally fast. This creates a mismatch because ASD learners often process information differently. They require more visual stability, explicit explanation, and predictable learning sequence. Therefore, this study was initiated to explore more suitable pedagogical approaches for accounting learners. Accounting is often perceived as a number subject, but in reality, it is a highly symbolic and procedural discipline. Students must understand transactions meaning, debit and credit logic, ledger posting, trial balance, adjustment, and financial statements in a continuous sequence. For students with ASD, this can be cognitively overwhelming, especially when lecturers explain too quickly and expect students to infer relationships mentally. The issue here is not simply learner weakness. The issue here is that accounting classrooms are still not sufficiently adapted to neurodiverse cognitive style. Hence, there remains a clear pedagogical gap in inclusive accounting education. Based on the pedagogical gap, we classified the problem here is due to limited of current teaching method and the need of discipline-specific adaptations. This paper was guided by three main objectives. Firstly, is to identify the dominant cognitive and learning characteristic of ASD students in tertiary education. Secondly, is to examine how visual pedagogical strategies can support accounting concept understanding. And lastly, is to analyze how cognitive scaffolding can support procedural mastery and accounting task completion. Why ASD students need special treatment? Literature shows that students with ASD actually possess several learning strengths. These include strong visual memory, high pattern sensitivity, and comfort with structured and rule-based systems. Interestingly, these characteristics suggest that accounting may potentially suit ASD learners because accounting is systematic and follow clear rules. However, these learners also experience challenges such as working memory overload, multitasking difficulty, rapid inferencing issues, and uncertainty with instructions. Therefore, they need a classroom environment that provides clarity, predictability, and stable visual references. The first proposed solution is visual pedagogy. Visual pedagogy means translating invisible accounting logic into visible learning materials. For example, using color-coded debit credit pathways, transaction flowcharts, accounting diagrams, infographic accounting cycles, and animated demonstrations. These tools allow students to physically see how accounting information moves from one stage to another. As a result, abstract accounting concepts become more concrete, traceable, and easier to remember. In other words, we can say that visual pedagogy approach is more on complex topics, simplifying the complex topics, highlighting a critical relationships, and enhancing engagement and memories for students. The second proposed solution is cognitive pedagogical scaffolding. This refers to structuring instructions into smaller and manageable procedural stages. Instead of teaching the full accounting cycle all at once, lecturers can separate transaction analysis, journal writing, ledger posting, and balancing into guided sequential steps. Additional supports, such as scaffolded sheets, checklist prompts, and repeated guided modeling helps students maintain procedural continuity. This significantly reduced cognitive overload and improves learner confidence. In other ways, we can say that cognitive pedagogy approach focus on chunking and task segmentation, guided repetition, and sequence reinforcement. The study is theoretically supported by two major learning theories. The first is dual coding theory by Alan Pavio, and the second one is cognitive load theory by John Shell. Let us discuss the first theory, dual coding theory, first. Okay, the dual coding theory explains that the learners understand better when information is delivered through both verbal and visual channels. Dual coding theory focuses on enhancing comprehension through dual channels, meaning that visual and verbal channels work together to provide multiple pathways for processing and retaining accounting concepts or reducing inherent ambiguity. And secondly, it mitigates verbal reliance, meaning that by incorporating visual elements like diagram, flowcharts, and color-coded transaction maps, reliance on verbal explanation decreases, accommodating the visual strengths of ASD learning, meaning that it enhances ASD learners through visual element. Okay. The thirdly, it strengthens memory through visual representations. Introducing deliverable visual cues helps students to retrieve concepts more easily, reinforce learning, and multiple encoded pathway, meaning that by looking at the visual, students can understand more rather than listening to what the lecturers explain. Besides that, dual coding theory also improves symbolic understanding. How does it improve? Okay, by using visual tools, we translate the abstracts of accounting terminologies into concrete, observable models, aiding students in forming connection between ideas. Besides that, it also increases learners' engagement. The combination of verbal and visual information reduces monotony and encounter consistent participation, particularly for neurodiverse students with a preferred for visual support. The second is cognitive load theory. This theory stated that learning becomes ineffective when too much information is processed simultaneously. So, cognitive load theory focuses on reducing cognitive demand through scaffolding. Okay. How? By chunking lessons into smaller, manageable steps. Educators minimize the mental load on students with ASD, enabling better focus and comprehension. Make the topic become smaller. Secondly, address working memory limitation. How? Structured learning environments provide sequential cues and routine, okay, which help learners internalize complex accounting procedures without becoming overwhelming. Step by step. Thirdly, improve task completion. How? Techniques such as guided practice, repeating procedure patterns, and using checklists maintain steady pace, ensuring students master step before advancing, meaning that accounting education must be done step by step or provide students with a proper guideline. Next, cognitive load theory also prevent cognitive overload. How? By limiting simultaneously interactions, learners process accounting tasks more effectively without being inundated with information beyond their capacity. And finally, the cognitive load theory also boosts confidence through consistency. Scaffolding introduces predictability in learning, reducing uncertainty and enable the student to approach procedural and symbolic tasks with assurance. Okay. Therefore, visual pedagogy strengthens concept retention while cognitive scaffolding regulates mental burden. In other words, we can say that both theories provide a strong conceptual basis for this study. Based on the reviewed literature, this paper proposed a conceptual framework. The independent variables are visual pedagogy approach and cognitive pedagogy approach. These two variables influence several mediating learning conditions such as conceptual clarity, reduced overload, stronger retention, learner confidence, and lower anxiety. Ultimately, these conditions lead to the dependent variable, which is enhanced accounting learning effective among ASD students. This framework positions both pedagogies as complementary, inclusive mechanisms. Overall, the literature leads to one central conclusion. Accounting is not inherently too difficult for students with ASD. The bigger issue is instructional mismatch. When accounting is taught only through verbal explanations and rapid procedural transfer, neurodiverse learners are placed at a disadvantage. However, when accounting is made visually explicit and cognitively sequenced, students gain clearer understanding, stronger procedural control, better engagement, and more academic confidence. Therefore, inclusive accounting education should move beyond simply admitting ASD students into mainstream classrooms. It must involve redesigning how accounting knowledge is represented, sequenced, and experienced cognitively. Future empirical classroom testing is therefore strongly recommended, especially within Malaysian polytechnic institutions. That's all from me, and thank you. I am open for questions and answers.